Event in this term's MPS programs Critical Conversation Series featuring Vito Acconci, artist and principal of Acconci Studio in Brooklyn, New York. I'm Joshua Dechter, director of the MPS program. Many thanks for being here. This evening's event marks the first co-sponsorship between the MPAS and MFA programs here at Roski, which is great. And I want to thank Charlie White, director of the MFA program, for his collaboration and support of this event. I also want to make a brief announcement about tomorrow's MFA Visiting Lecture series, which takes place on Wednesdays from noon to 2, which will feature Martha Rossler. And then in our program, next Tuesday, we will have Rick Lowe and Mark Bradford in conversation. Both of our graduate school posters, which lists our lectures, are available in the front of this room. I just want to make a couple of technical requests that mobile phones be silenced or turned off, please. And we are recording the event tonight. I need to say this for apparently legal purposes, so you're aware of that. And so when there's a question and answer period after Vito's lecture, there'll be an opportunity, for people to have their ideas recorded. Vito Acconci was born in the Bronx, New York in 1940 and currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. In 1962, he received a BA and an MA from Holy Cross College in Worcester, Massachusetts, and in 1964, an MFA from the University of Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa. Vito has had numerous exhibitions, far too many to list tonight, of course, at a range of institutions over the past 40 years, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney Museum, the Guggenheim, Documenta, the Venice Biennale, the Pompidou, Dia, the Prato in Italy, the Mack Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, the La Jolla Museum, now known as the Orange County Museum, the Serpentine Gallery in London, PS1, Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, the Kitchen, the Stedelijk, MoCA, Los Angeles, the Tate. He exhibited for many years at the Sonneman Gallery, as well as Barbara Gladstone Gallery, and Vito's work is in the collection of many institutions, MoMA, Centre Pompidou, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Whitney, so on and so forth. Briefly, I just want to call out a number of key pieces by Vito. I had a longer introduction, but I think it's important for Vito to start as soon as possible because he is the main attraction. Just a few pieces. Following piece, seedbed, applications, rubbings, conversations, the red tapes, some works from the 1980s, including House of Cars, Bad Dream House, Bodies in the Park, House on the Ground. Acconci Studio, a truly interdisciplinary platform of design and building, was initiated in 1988. In the socially collaborative, fundamentally experimental context of the Acconci Studio, architecture and design are considered at once theoretical and practical processes. Architecture and design are utilized as mutable languages that can be strategically and tactically responsive to various social, cultural, and political situations, whether at Ground Zero in New York, or in the city of Graz in Austria, or technological conditions, the space of information. His public projects in architecture from the 1990s and this past decade include Personal Island, Personal River, Flying Floors for the main ticketing pavilion, the Philadelphia Airport, Screens for a walkway between buildings and buses and cars, Shibuya Station, Tokyo, Japan, Courtyard in the Wind, Moving Park, Buildings Department Administration, Munich, Wall Slide, Wall and Seating System, 161st Street Subway Station, the Bronx, New York, Muir Island, Floating Cafe, Theater and Playground in Graz, Austria, United Bamboo Clothing Store in Tokyo, and so on and so forth. Among various accolades, in 2002, Vito was awarded an honorary doctorate of fine arts from the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. He has received ID Magazine's Award for Excellence in Design in 1998, 1999, and 2001. In 2002, Vito was a Robert Gwathmey Chair at Cooper Union in New York. Vito will speak for about 90 minutes. and then we will have a question and answer from about 7:30 to somewhat after 8:30. Please welcome Vito Acconci.
Thank you. As Joshua said, the recent work is architecture and design, or we don't think of it as art. We think of it as architecture and design. It didn't start that way, but the work didn't start as art either. It started as writing. It started as poetry. So I want to give a kind of hopefully quick idea of how stuff started and why it eventually got to where it is. The work began as poetry in the mid 60s to late 60s. When I was writing, I was probably trying to make words do possibly what it couldn't do. I wanted words to be matter. I wanted words to be material. In other words, when you look at words, you're used to looking through words to content. I and a number of other people at that time wanted possibly to do something different. Could we make words be fact? In other words, the page was important. Movement over the page was important. When I was doing a poem in the late 60s, my start was, how do I move? How do I move from left margin to right margin? How do I move from top of the page to bottom? It seemed impossible then to use on a page a word like tree, a word like chair, because this referred to another space, a space off the page, where I wanted the reader to be traveling over a page, traveling from page to page. So if I couldn't use words or wouldn't use words that took you to another space, I would try to do words that placed you on the page, that took you over the page, here, there. I couldn't use tree or chair, but I could say in that place, at that time. After a while, I started to think I was so interested in movement. Why was I confining this movement to a page? There's a world out there. There's a floor out there. There's a ground out there. So at the end of the 60s, the work changed context. No longer writing, no longer a page, but an art context. Why an art context? Because at that time, at the end of the 60s, the way a lot of people thought about art was that it wasn't so much a specific field, but it took from other fields. It could take from sociology, from psychology, from history, from news. So at the end of the 60s, the starting position I had was I'm in real space. Now that I'm in real space, now that I'm in actual space, what gives me a reason to move there? One example, a piece called Following Piece in 1969, done for a program called Streetworks, in which a number of people, some artists, some poets, were asked to do something over the course of a month, to do something involving the street, specifically New York streets. The piece I did had a very simple scheme. Each day I would pick out at random a person in the street, a person walking. Each day then I would follow a person, follow a different person, until that person entered a private place, home, office, whatever. So that following pieces would range from, say, 2 or 3 minute episodes when someone got into a car and I couldn't follow, ranging from that to, say, 7 or 8 hour episodes when someone went to a restaurant, a movie, etc. If you could apply a language to the pieces I was doing then, the language would be something like I, a person, an agent, attends to it, a world considered as if it's out there. How do I find some way to tie myself into that world, key myself into that world? In other words, I was trying to make myself a kind of passive receiver of somebody else's action. Maybe somebody else's action could take me where, that other person's action could take me where I hadn't planned to go. So in other words, I was setting up, the way work started for me was, let me set up a set of rules that determine my action, but don't determine the specifics of that action. The specifics are determined by something outside of me. After doing pieces like this for a while, at the end of the 60s, I started to think that I had to, if I'm using my own person in pieces, and I want to make just a general note about person. Why the use of my own person? And I wasn't the only person doing this, because I think the use of one's own person was because that's what the time was doing. The end of the 60s was a time in which the common language was finding oneself, as if the self is something that you wanted to withdraw from the rest of the world from in order to concentrate on the self. In other words, this was the kind of music of the time. Neil Young music, Van Morrison music, single voice, long song, giving the person enough time to find the self. So I started using then my own person. What seemed to be important about my own person was I had to find some way to make some interaction with you, the viewer. The way I wanted art to be, and I'm not sure if art can do this, was that it would set up some situation in which I faced you. One example, an activity, a performance piece in 1971 called Claim. It took place in a two-level space, street level and basement. On street level, next to the door leading downstairs to the basement, there's a video monitor, so that the monitor gives somebody an idea of what's going on in the basement. Person then decides whether or not to open the door, come downstairs. The piece is a 3-hour piece. I'm seated on a chair at the foot of the stairs in the basement. I'm blindfolded, and I have with me 2 lead pipes and a crowbar. I'm talking, constantly talking directed to myself, but talking aloud, saying things like, I'm alone here in the basement. I want to stay alone here in the basement. I don't want anybody to come down in the basement with me. I'll stop anybody from coming down in the basement with me. I'm alone here in the basement. I want to stay alone here in the basement. In other words, saying that kind of talk over and over again, drumming that talk into me as almost a kind of hypnotizing device, convincing myself that this basement is mine. So whenever I hear a person coming downstairs, I swing the lead pipe, swing the crowbar in front of me, as the title of the piece says, claiming this space. In retrospect, since the work did become design and architecture, this was probably, though I certainly didn't think of it this way, this was making some kind of private house, some kind of private space for me. Somebody else can't get in. Okay, what I liked about pieces like this was that I thought I was setting up a situation of meeting. An art occasion would be a situation where I faced you, where I met you, where person in the role of artist comes face to face with person in the role of viewer. At the same time, though, I started to be disturbed by a lot of these things, by a lot of things I was setting up. I set myself up as a kind of still point. A viewer has to go through lead pipes and crowbars in order to get to me. In other words, I thought I was setting up a situation of meeting, but a meeting should be between equals. and I'm starting to think that I'm setting up this glorified position for me. A viewer has to struggle in order to get for me. In other words, all the things I thought I hated about art as a kind of religion, and artwork as a kind of altar, and artists as a kind of priest, it started to seem to me that that's what my work was falling into. So there had to be some kind of change. And that change, I thought, had to come from thinking that maybe I wasn't a point in a space. If I'm a point in a space, I'm a focal point. If I'm a focal point, I'm this important thing in the space. I thought, maybe, why can't I be part of the space? Can I be part of the architecture of a room? Thinking like that led to a piece in the beginning of 1972, a piece called Seedbed, conventional gallery room, about 25 feet wide, about 45 feet long. Halfway across the room, the floor becomes a ramp. The floor rises to a height of about 2.5 feet, 3 feet at the far wall. The piece is performed, or the piece is activated for a number of days over a two week period. Each day the piece is activated from opening time of the gallery to closing time. So a viewer walks into the room because the floor becomes a ramp. Maybe without thinking about it too much, a person walks across the floor, starts to walk up the ramp. For that 8-hour period, I'm underneath the ramp. I'm underneath the floor, moving around under this floor where people are walking. And my attempt is to constantly masturbate. In order to do so, using viewers as help. Help in the sense that I hear people's footsteps on top of me. I can build sexual fantasies on those footsteps. Those sexual fantasies keep my activity going, keep my masturbation going. Every now and then the masturbation reaches climax. I'm going backwards, I don't mean to. Though the piece itself was going backwards, since it was a kind of regression. Every once in a while, the masturbation reaches climax. A person on top of the floor might be thinking something like, oh, he's done this with me. He's done this for me. In any case, an attempt to join more private space under the ramp with more social space, more public space above the ramp. I didn't mention that my voice is coming up from under the ramp. So as a person is walking from under the ramp, a voice says, I'm doing this with the person on my left, I'm touching your hair, I'm running my hand down your back, etc. Okay, one or two things about Seedbed. I mentioned that it was done each day from opening time of the gallery to closing time. I mentioned that not so much to stress the endurance test quality of the project, though probably like it or not, it was that. The opening time to closing time, the opening time to closing time made sense to me because it seemed that I had to be part of the room. I had to be part of the room as far as any viewer knew it. In other words, I couldn't, while viewers were there, go into and under this floor as if it was kind of a stage. I couldn't leave that floor while viewers were still there. So I had to be there before the first viewer got there, after the first viewer left. It was this kind of desperate attempt that could I become part of the architecture? But I certainly at that time wasn't thinking of myself doing architecture. What I think has always happened with work of mine is that it's never that I'm doing one thing and then I decide I want to do something else. It's more that the work starts to go in a certain direction and I start to realize that I have to kind of listen to what the work is saying. After all, I'm doing the work, so I must be saying this to myself. Okay, one thing that happened after Seedbed is that I started to wonder things like, if I'm not seen in a space, do I really have to be there at all? And I think that was a reflection of me having second thoughts of live activity, of so-called performance. And those second thoughts had to do with the fact that I started to wonder, has my work lost sight of its time? That language of finding oneself, this was the language of the late 60s, but it wasn't the late 60s anymore. It was 1972, 73, 74. I think people were starting to have a different notion of self. Self wasn't this precious jewel that you had to isolate yourself in order to examine. By the mid-70s, people including me, were thinking more as the self exists as part of a social system, a cultural system, a political system. If you withdraw from everyday world in order to find yourself, maybe you find nothing. Maybe the self isn't anything. Maybe the self is only a social use of the self, a political use, a cultural use. So by the mid-70s, work changed. Work became what people were calling installations. Installation is a very vague, there are a lot of vague art terms. Installation was possibly the vaguest in the sense that anything is installed. A painting is installed, a piece of furniture is installed, a rug is installed. So I think at that time, those of us who were doing it's always what other people were calling. I mean, I think the people who did this stuff probably never name it. And that might not be a good thing, because if we think we know what we're doing, we should help people by trying to name it. But at that time, I think if I, for example, who was doing installations, I had to try to figure out why am I doing this? What's important to what's important about an installation? And for me, there were two basic things. When I did a piece at this time, I never did a piece until a gallery or museum was giving me a show. Once a show was being given to me, I would try to examine the space and try to find the particular quirks of the space. In other words, it was important to me to find something that I could do in this space that possibly I couldn't do anywhere else. Ideally, I wanted to do, and this didn't always happen, but ideally I wanted to do an installation that once it was done here could never be done anywhere else. Why was that so important? Because I hated the idea of art being considered a universal thing. I didn't believe and don't believe anything is universal. Something is considered universal maybe if it's approved by the power culture of the time. So I wanted things to be very specific. This made sense in this particular space at this particular time. At another time, it probably doesn't make sense or would have to make another sense. The other thing that interested me in installations was that obviously there were people in these spaces. There were people in museum spaces, in gallery spaces, and I wanted to do something. The way I wanted to think of a space was, this is a peopled space. I wanted to make a place not out of a space, but out of a space that people are using. One example of the installations was a 1976 piece called Where We Are Now, parentheses, who are we anyway? It was done in Sonnabend Gallery at that time, the gallery neighborhood in New York, West Broadway in Soho. The main entrance to the space was around the corner of the black room. You enter the room by the elevator. You walk around this kind of L-shaped corridor that takes you into what's usually used as the main room of the gallery. for the purpose of this piece, the doorway to the gallery is blocked off. The outside of this room, not the gallery so much, the outside of this room painted black. Next to this black room is a long table, long wooden plank, stools on either side of the table. The table is propped up on the windowsill of the gallery, and then extends out of the gallery. So what began as a table became a diving board, or the way I saw it, whether anybody else saw it this way or not. When you do a project, obviously you're doing, you hope you're doing something for people, but you're also probably giving yourself a message. And I think at this time I wanted to give myself the message that I had to get out of here. I had to get out of galleries. I had to get out of an art world. All the pieces of the mid 70s use sound. In this case, there's a hanging speaker above the table. There's a constant clock ticking, and as the clock is ticking, my voice comes in saying things like, "Now that we're all here together, and what do you think, Bob? Now that we've gone as far as we can go, and what do you think, Barbara? Now that we're satisfied, now that we know we failed." In other words, it was a voice kind of calling a community meeting together. Of the installations I did, this piece really, really interested me because I thought, wow, I had found a way to turn a gallery or museum into something like a plaza, something like a town square. But at the same time, I thought, I'm really kidding myself. A gallery or museum is never going to be a town square or a plaza. It's never going to be a public place. If I really think I need a public space, if I really think the work is heading towards a public space, I've got to find some way to get there. So the next few years, the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, was spent in trying to kind of reinvent architecture for myself. Stuff of mine had always been connected with the person, with the body. So in the beginning of the 80s, I did a number of pieces that tried to urge a visitor to the gallery to use a kind of instrument, use a kind of vehicle in the gallery. The use of the instrument would maybe make some kind of shelter, something like architecture. This was a piece in the beginning of 1980 called Instant House. 4 panels, American flag covered on the floor, and hanging down in the middle is a swing. If a person sits on the swing starts to go down, and these panels are walls that start to rise up around the user. And the instant house is an American flag house inside, a Soviet flag house outside. So you make one kind of space for yourself, maybe another kind of space as an announcement for others. One thing I liked about these projects was that the house only lasts as long as a person keeps the vehicle going, keeps the instrument going. When you get up from the swing, the walls go back down to their original position. So I like the fact of a person being connected with the durability of the house. At the same time, I realized that maybe a building, a house, is something that people have to go back to. It's not a performance piece. It's not an activity. Maybe an activity makes a house, but then the house is there for people to use it as they want. So gradually, towards the middle of the 80s, I started to make places that maybe lasted for a while. I was still thinking in terms of I'm trying to head towards architecture, but I'm not really an architect. I don't know really how to do architecture. At the same time, I've been used I've been used to having pieces built by others, which had become by this time a kind of art tradition. And I want to go back to that notion because, or I want to talk about that notion for a while, because the fact that I had people build pieces for me made me think that these people aren't just fabricating stuff for a so-called artist. These people are probably collaborating with me. I'm getting the ideas I have because I know that I'm working with people who know how to do this stuff. So in the back of my mind, the notion of maybe I can't be working as a single agent anymore. Maybe I have to be working as part of a group. But this, these thoughts were maybe starting here in the mid '80s. In the mid '80s, I was probably more concerned with how can I make this place for others. So coming off from the notion of me thinking, I may be a fake architect. I'm a make-believe architect. I'm trying to pretend I'm an architect. So this was a house called. This was a 1984 piece called Bad Dream House, probably starting with the idea that, well, a real architect can make a dream house. Maybe all I can do is make a bad dream house. So made a house of three. Made a project made of three upside down houses. Two upside down houses leaning, tilted against each other, so that they support a third upside down house on top. The upside down house on top, more like a glass house, garden house. The houses on the bottom, conventional brick facing, shingled roofs, like the houses you expect to find on the ground. You enter at either end through the open gable. You sit at or maybe walk past an upside down table, or you go upstairs to what used to be the underside of the house. Now that the house is upside down, the underside of the two houses on the ground are facing sets of seats, bleachers, or you go further upstairs to the glass house, garden house. Some walls transparent, some translucent, some mirrored, some opaque. Around this time, it started to be clear to me that if I'm doing pieces that are making their own spaces, maybe I don't need gallery spaces. Maybe I don't need museum spaces. So I was thinking more than of I have to work as part of a group of people, and I had to work as part of a group of people for two basic reasons. Number one, I wanted to do architecture, but I really didn't know how. So I had to work with people who did have architectural training. I had to work as part of a group of people. But there was just as important, and there was another reason, I think just as important, if not more important. I was thinking at this time that I'm making public places. Can one person make a public place? Can a person in privacy make a public place? So I started to think that maybe public places can only come from a group of people working together, thinking together, talking together, discussing. I started to be very affected by English language phrases like, the person who lives by the sword dies by the sword, which I translated into, if something begins private, it can only end private. So at the end of the 80s, Acconci Studio started. It started relatively small. It's remained small. It started with maybe one designer, one architect besides me. Now it's four or five people working. All architects. No registered architects, or not yet. They've all gone to architecture school. The way Acconci Studio doesn't work is I have an idea for a project and the rest of the people carry it out. The way it works is it's a kind of discussion group. Maybe I start maybe most of the projects off with a general idea, with a general method. I think what I do best is have general ideas, have general methods. I don't think I'm particularly good at details. It's not that I don't want details, but I think I'm best if maybe I start a general method, then together we start talking. As we're talking, the general method changes. What started as one person's idea becomes a number of persons, multiple ideas. I probably can't say truthfully that 4 or 5 people think better than one, but they certainly think more than one. And I think that's kind of important because there's always another idea. There's always something that maybe keeps a project going. I sometimes think that I wonder if I want our projects to be particularly complete. I think I have a fear that if a project is so complete, why would anybody else come in? If a project is so complete, can anybody get out? So I think I like the idea of loose ends. The rest of the talk will deal with Acconci studio pieces, starting in the 90s, since Acconci Studio formed in 1988, as Joshua said. Nobody knew of us as architects then. Certainly nobody knew of me as an architect, though again, the people in the studio were architects. So the projects we were asked to do weren't so much what I think of as real architecture projects. They were more public art projects. Public art projects, especially in the United States, exist mainly because of 1% for art laws. If a public building is built, 1% of the budget is allotted for so-called public art. I thought in the beginning that there was something really inviting about doing public art. If 1% of if only 1% of the budget is used for public art, while the rest of it is used for architecture, the artist then can maybe think, we're coming from the margins. We're coming from another direction. Maybe we can represent the minority voice. We're not given the major amount of the money, we're given a very minor amount of the money. If we're so minor, can we be a minority voice? One example, just to give you an idea of how we try to treat public projects. This is the site of a project we did in the mid-90s. It's excuse me. It's Queens College in New York. It's a kind of pass-through space in front of the English department building. One of the ways we would deal with public projects was that since we were always doing a project for a building that was either already built or already designed, we would try to find some way to key into this building, key into somebody else's design. Can we take what's already there and try to maybe exaggerate it, enlarge it, make it multiple? At this point, the idea of multiplying was important to us because we thought, I had in the back of my mind at this time that if a building is built, it's built because it's approved by the power culture. So maybe we can try to make a disease on a building. Maybe we can come from the outside. A disease exists through proliferation, through multiplication. So, for example, in this project, we started with 2 elements that were already there. On either side of the stairway is a pedestal on top of which is a 3-foot diameter concrete sphere. So those concrete spheres seem to be trying to make an extra grandiose entrance to what was only the entrance to an English department building. At the same time, these two concrete spheres seem to be very lost in the space. So what our project did was bring in other spheres. A whole group of spheres ranging from very small, about 1 foot in diameter, going through the already existent 3-foot diameter sphere, going through to a sphere 12 feet in diameter, 15 feet in diameter. The spheres are cut. The spheres are cut into so you can walk through a sphere. As it becomes night, there's a light. There's a light in the inside of the sphere. So as it becomes night, it provides light for this. What used to be a pass-through space, now maybe it becomes a more meeting place, a more social space. What I've never really been able to get, I liked projects like this. What I've never been able to get out of my mind is, could 3 or 4 folding chairs have served the same purpose? Was it so important to build something into the space? I've always had this nagging doubt. I've never totally gotten rid of it. Anyway, with regard to public space, though I wanted to believe that you could come in from the margins, you can do something, because maybe you got the minor amount of money, you could do something that the architect could never do. After a while, I started to almost shrug my shoulders and think, maybe the 1% for art law means only that the art is worth 1% of the architecture. So maybe it's only a folly. Whatever. Gradually, I think in the last 10 years or so, the stuff we've been doing maybe is more in the realm of, I don't know, real architecture, whatever real architecture is. I want to give a general statement. Why did this stuff? Why did I feel like I couldn't go on being in an art context? Probably an easy way of saying it is that art depends on viewers. Art gathers together people to view something. I don't think I ever wanted viewers. In other words, the basic situation of art is a person is here and the art is there, and the person is in a position of desire. But not only desire, but probably frustration, because there are always those do not touch signs in a museum. So no matter how much you desire something, you can never have it. You can never be part of it. Gradually, I think I realized I wasn't so interested in viewers. I wanted participants. I wanted users. I wanted inhabitants. I think the basic reason that made me go from art to design is that I started to realize that through design you can be involved with all the everyday occasions of everyday life. You can make clothing, you can make furniture, you can make products. In other words, you can do things that aren't apart from people. You can do things that cover people, like clothing. You can do things that people hold in their hands, like a glass, like a tool. You can do things that people go into, like buildings. So for the rest of the talk, I want to go over some kinds of operations that we tend to use, or that tend to be in the back of our minds, not always very blatantly in the back of our minds, but they're ways we probably have gotten used to thinking. A set of maybe because of the background I had in work that was activity, I tend to, and I think most of the people in the studio tend to think this way too. I tend to think of places not as stopping places for people, but more like circulation routes. Ideally, what we really want our spaces to do, and I don't know if any space of ours has ever done this, but we want spaces to empower people. We want spaces that maybe can be upside down or inside out, so that hopefully a person using a space of ours starts to think, maybe a space isn't as implacable as I learned to think it was. If this space can be turned inside out, maybe I can turn my own space inside out. Maybe I can turn my own space upside down. Which brings up for me the fact that one thing that draws me so much to architecture is something that really, really bothers me about architecture. The fact that when you design a space, you're inherently designing people's behavior in the space. So that my worry is architecture inherently a totalitarian activity? Are you telling people what to do? Obviously, we want to do the opposite of that. We want people to at least have choices. We want people to be able to maybe shape their space. Have we ever been able to do that? No, but I think a lot of architects are thinking that way, so somebody is going to do it. Okay, these operations then, for each operation, there's an example of how it works. Some projects start in one operation, then continue later in another operation. Operation number one, make a world, then poke a hole in the world, an architecture of holes. This was a coffee and tea set we were asked to do in 2003. We and a number of other architects. The kind of coffee and tea set we were asked to provide was supposed to contain four containers: coffee, tea, milk, and sugar, and some kind of tray. In the back of our mind, we thought if we did something good enough, it could all cohere together. It wouldn't need a tray. So we started with a generalized sphere, then took parts away from the sphere, so that all that was left was four containers: coffee, tea, milk, and sugar, and transparent connectors. This project comes back later. Another example of an architecture of holes. A proposal we made for a performing arts center in Seoul, Korea, in 2005. The performing arts center was going to be on an island. The island was a floodable island, so that the competition brief said the actual building should be on the upper part of the island. The rest of the island, since it was going to be flooded, and we would never know when it was flooded, the rest of the island should be used for landscape. This seemed kind of misguided to us, since it seemed like the greenery would always be flooded. So what we tried to provide was a kind of alien landscape. Let's think of a landscape as if on Mars. So there would be these holes, these craters. These craters would be places where there might be table and seat places. Since some of the craters are filled with these capsules. The starting point for this was that since this performing arts center was on an island, people might want to stay there for a while. So the capsules would be rooms, hotel rooms. You could rent a hotel room for a while on this island. Once I thought, when we propose things, do we really believe people will build this stuff? In some ways, we're kind of incurable optimists. We think that somebody might want something that isn't maybe the most usual way of doing something. But most of the architects we pay attention to, and us, we build maybe 15% of our projects, 12% of our projects. The interesting thing about architecture compared to art is that you think of architecture as a project, whether it's built or not. Like when I think of architects over the years, over the centuries that have interested me, that have influenced me, I think of maybe Piranesi and Boulez in the 18th century, Archigram in the 1960s. Not one built project. The thing about unbuilt projects is that maybe they act better as a theory. They're clearer. It's clearer to see things when it's in model form, when it's in drawing form. At the same time, I think things really do have to be built. That sometimes ideas are cheap. It's very easy to have ideas. It's very easy to have an idea of a space. Maybe you have to test those ideas, and the only way something can be tested is to be built. The troublesome thing about architecture is that it takes so long. It takes so long to build that maybe it takes, most of our projects have taken, the build projects have taken maybe 5 years to build, 3 years, 7 years. In other words, you have an idea of maybe what might be the right thing to do at this particular place, but then years go by. The city's probably changed. Architecture is always too late. Which brings up, though, for me, the other thing that really interested me in architecture, or maybe has interested me more and more as I do architecture, the fact that most buildings have to be renovated. The great thing about architecture compared to art is that art tries to preserve something. Art tries to preserve a sculpture the way it was in the Renaissance, etc. Architecture always kind of shrugs its shoulders. There's always going to be a different need. The great thing about architecture is that it recognizes that time changes and everything changes, and that's something that maybe keeps me drawn to architecture. Another example of an architecture of wholes, a project we did in 2002, we, like a lot of other people, did a hypothetical proposal for a new World Trade Center. We proposed a World Trade Center full of holes. Our starting point was that if a building nowadays is going to be exploded anyway, maybe a building nowadays should come already exploded, pre-exploded. So we took the original site of the World Trade Center, extruded it to a height of 110 stories high. So now there was more volume than the original World Trade Center ever was. There was more private office space than anybody could possibly need. So we shoot cones through it, riddling the building with holes. Now that it's a building riddled with holes, it can act as a kind of urban camouflage. A terrorist flying by above might look down and say, "Oh, we don't have to bother about this building. It's already been dealt with." This project comes back later with another operation. Operation number 2, overlay, screen, camouflage, a second skin. This is the site of a clothing store we did in Tokyo in 2003 for a group of young designers, United Bamboo, who practice in the United States, in New York. This was going to be their first building. They were a little bit worried. This was going to be their first store. They were worried about this building because it's a modular system that in Japan is commonly used for residences, for houses. So the United Bamboo people were worried that this was never going to look like a store. So we thought maybe we had to put something over it. Maybe we had to screen it. So our first step was to screen it with a metal mesh. Once the metal mesh was there, the glass in between the metal mesh would either bulge out or push in. The store itself is on the ground floor, the offices on the top floor. The bulging facade on the top floor holds a projection screen. And the way it works is, when you're inside the store, if you're trying on United Bamboo clothes, if you like the way you look, you can press a button in the mirror so that you become the model for the United Bamboo clothes. I want to continue this project in the next operation, operation number 3. Bubble, wave, bulge, ooze, and architecture of flow. For the United Bamboo store, we tried to make a store We tried to make a store that was as soft as clothing, as soft as skin. So the material we used was PVC, not exactly a fabric, a kind of plastic. It's usually used for rear screen projection, so it's soft. So we have PVC on the ceiling, we pull it down to make walls, pull it out to make a counter. It's a constant push and pull system. We pull the PVC out as taut as possible so that now it can carry products. Because it's a material that's used for rear screen projection, we don't have to light the shelves from outside. We can have light inside the shelves. It's a very small space. One of the reasons we used this soft material is that we thought if the material was soft, maybe the space would seem larger. The space itself is only 15 feet wide, 45 feet long. So we knew that we had to be able to use all the space we could possibly get. Anytime there was a non-structural wall, we removed the wall and put a curving glass alcove outside the store, so that we gained some extra room, so that the racks of hanging clothes got a little more space beside the store. Operation number 4, continuous surface, endless space. This was a bench we did in 2000, 2001. A few examples were built. This one was in a small city in Japan, Fukuroi City. It was a bench based on the notion of a Moebius strip. Just as a Moebius strip, by twisting, seems to have two sides, an inside and an outside. Here, the back of the bench twists to become the seat of the bench, which twists to become the bottom of the bench. You sit on the outside of a circle. You move over a little bit. Now you're inside the circle. This kind of space is a space that in the 90s, maybe late 90s, was really interesting us and a lot of other designers. It's a space from a kind of branch of math that hasn't been paid too much attention to until lately. It's not a Euclidean geometry. It's a topological math. The thing about a topological figure is that something can be a sphere, but doesn't have to always look like a sphere. It can be pushed, it can be pulled, it can be twisted. As long as it retains the same volume, it's still this topological shape. What interested a lot of people in it. Somebody who was working in the studio at this time gave a really interesting description of a topological space. If you put an ant down on what seems like the inside or the outside, the ant, without being able to fly, without being lifted off, goes continuously from inside to outside and then back. So it's a space that it's a continuous space. I know it excited us because we thought, well, if a space is so continuous, maybe then terms like private and public don't really make much sense, because private can very easily then continuously go into something public, but maybe it can also go back. A problem possibly with a topological space is that if something is so complete, if something is so continuous, how could anybody get in? How could anybody inside get out? But we were again trying different versions of it. This was a project designed around the same time, 2000, 2001. It's a project that every few years seems like it's going to be built. It possibly never will. We were asked to do a playground, so we proposed a playground based on a topological shape called the Klein model. To give you a quick idea of what a Klein bottle is, if a regular bottle has a neck extending out from it, the way the Klein bottle works is the neck extends out from the bottle, then goes out, the neck is at the top of the bottle, then goes out, and then comes back and blends with the bottle. It's a kind of three-dimensional version of a Moebius strip. So we tried to do. We proposed a playground based on a topological shape called the Klein bottle. To give you a quick idea of what a Klein bottle is, if a regular bottle has a neck extending out from it, the way the Klein bottle works is the neck extends out from the bottle, then goes out, the neck is at the top of the bottle, then goes out, and then comes back and blends with the bottle. It's a kind of three-dimensional version of a Moebius strip. We thought this was maybe an appropriate model for a playground, because we thought if we made a Klein bottle with 4 necks, there would be 4 entrances for children. If we made the surface transparent and filled with holes, now we could have a place where a person climbing outside can come face to face with, can meet a person climbing inside, or you can easily slide from inside to outside, or vice versa. Operation number 5, push and pull. This is a project that we designed and built in Memphis in 2004. It's at the corner of a performing art center. Like a lot of projects, this project began when it was realized that once the building was designed, it left this leftover space at the corner. So we and some other people were asked, could we propose something that could make a place in this corner? Can we make use of this leftover space? Can it act as something like a plaza, so that during performance events inside, people might go outside and gather. Just to give an example of how sometimes we start pieces, there's an overhang of the building. Part of the building hangs over the plaza. So the way we started was, what if we stood here? What if we tried to fling something out into the plaza? What if we could fling something like a liquid? But whatever we fling has to stand up. So we pull it down to make columns. At the same time, we push it up to make a funnel. Now that there's a funnel, sunlight comes in. In the back of our minds was, there are spotlights on the stage inside. Can we make spotlights of sun outside? At night, the sunlight is replaced by artificial light. There's another funnel that's pulled down towards the entrance of the building. This bears light, so it lights the entrance as you go in. This project comes back. Some other examples of push and pull. This was the site of a subway station facade that we did recently in New York. It's a subway station in Coney Island. So it was brought up to us that it's an elevated station. It's important that it's important that it has views. We tried to think, instead of just thinking of windows, can we think of a way to make views. So we tried to use the nearby ocean as a model. Just as the ocean waves, can our facade wave? Can it wave from upper floor to lower floor? Can it wave in and out? Can it bulge? Can it wave out to hold this stairway going up to the station? As you're in the station, then the facade bulges till it reaches a breaking point. So now there's a view. Every once in a while, the facade bulges but doesn't reach a breaking point. When it doesn't reach a breaking point, it becomes seating. It becomes seating for the station. Another example of push and pull back to the Seoul Performing Arts Center. The building itself was like this kind of spaceship. And the way we thought of it was, it would be this surface that you could push in. You push the surface in, for example, to make a circulation route through the building. Now that you're inside the circulation route, now a surface is pushed out. So it makes various rooms, a concert hall, an opera house, a restaurant. Operation number 6. Not an end, but a medium. Not an object, but an instrument. An architecture of its surroundings. Back to the Memphis project. The structure for these columns, the structure for the columns at the bottom bends and folds, so now it becomes a seat. So you can sit at the base of the columns, but you can also go inside the column. The surface, both inside and outside, is mirrored. So when you're inside the column, the sky is reflected down on the circular wall around you. So you're in effect sitting inside a room of sky. Another example of mirroring is a kind of clothing project we did in 2005. A little magazine called The Black Box proposed to us that the umbrella hasn't been redesigned in years. Do we want to try our hand at a new umbrella? So we started with the idea of ruffles in clothing. Ruffles could make a folding system. So we made what we called an umbruffla, a combination of umbrella and ruffles. It's made of two-way mirrored mylar. So because of the change of light from inside and outside, when you're wearing it, you can see out, but outside people just see reflections of the city. This project comes back later. Operation number 7, split, separate, strips and strands. The notion of breaking something, splitting something, opening something keeps coming back for us. Not necessarily, opening in order to destroy, but when you split something, can it have a use it didn't have before? This is a project we're working on now for an amphitheater for a theater in Stavanger in Norway. This is more of a public art project. We were the concert hall and the amphitheater already had an architect, but then we were called in because people said that this wasn't always going to be used as a theater, but the kinds of seats that are there are always seats facing front, facing a stage. Can we turn this into more of a public space? So what we did was come in and use as a model a river system, a river and rivulets. So we would run these rivers down the amphitheater steps and seats. As we ran them down, then they would make these openings, make these gaps. So now you didn't just have to sit facing front, facing the stage. A person can sit facing a person. So it could be maybe more of a kind of dialogue space. person-to-person space. I just want to go back to that, to this slide. That area at the foot of the amphitheater is what they were going to use as a kind of stage area. So we couldn't make gaps there, but we do continue our river lines. So light now comes up. So that would provide lighting for the stage, and those objects at the back of the stage are like stuff that could be used for different kinds of stage sets. I mean, always we try to make things have multiple uses. Operation number 8. Folding, enfolding, embedding. It's one of those many projects that was almost certainly going to happen, but isn't going to happen. It's for a city, actually a small village in the south of France. Very infrequently do we get, it's the only time I think we've been asked to do something for a small village. It's a village of 400 people. The mayor approached us and said that the village is very connected to its landscape. It's very connected to its time. It's very connected to its space, but it doesn't have any sense. It doesn't have any sense of now. Can we try to bring the village into the 21st century? Which is a kind of great call, but the call didn't last. But anyway. Beaumont is a village that lists. It's in the mountains. Yet the way it survives is through farming. So since it's in the mountains, the only way they can farm is to terrace the slopes of the mountains. So we thought maybe this is a way to start thinking of housing. So our first proposal was, could we have houses on the slope? The houses would be partly outside the slope and partly inside. Since they were partly inside the slope, the houses would be cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter. So then we tried out various ways. Can we have a line of houses? But this seemed too much like an apartment house. So could we maybe join one line with another line, or have a kind of intersection? But we started to think we're thinking too much of a kind of city space here. We needed more something like private houses. But by that time, we didn't have the project anymore. Another example. Well, we didn't have the project for actually a reason we had to get out of the project, because it was a project that we could do the design, but then when construction had to happen, a different architect came in, and we wouldn't have any control over his or her construction drawings. We thought we built too few things to let that happen, so we left, even though it was a project we liked. Another kind of folding example. Some of these competitions were invited competitions. This was an invited competition for a museum in Perm in Russia. The museum, this was maybe two years ago. Like a lot of these competitions, nothing got built. That's a kind of common thing in architecture. The museum was supposed to be at the top of the slope. We always need a starting point, or maybe I always need a starting point. So I was talking to the studio saying, this slope is too steep. Let's think of the slope as it's a kind of call of the wild. The museum can't resist the slope. So even though the museum is supposed to be at the top of the slope, our museum starts to fall down the slope. It starts to become almost more like landscape. It goes under a bridge. There are train tracks across the slope. So our museum goes over the train tracks. Perm is a kind of out-of-the-way place. So what we proposed was that maybe there could be a train station in the museum so that trains would go directly to the museum. I mean, every time we do a project, we try to treat it as if this is going to be built. It probably won't, but maybe we can use some ideas elsewhere. Because we made such a kind of turning, twisting skin, we made a place inside where there really wasn't any wall space, even though this was a museum. So everything would be hanging, paintings would be hanging, so you would either see the backs of paintings, or paintings would be hanging back to back, so you would be walking through. Operation number 8, stretch, tentacles and feelers, an architecture of landscape. This was the site of a skate park that we were asked to do in 2004. The site is in San Juan. When we went to see the site, we thought that we saw that there were already 3 high points on the site. There's a pedestrian ramp over a restaurant. Next to it is a cone-shaped hill, and on the other side is a slope that goes up to a plateau that looks out over an ocean. It's one of those sites you probably never get again in your life. So our starting point was that it's as if the skate park is already there. Since skateboarding depends on high points, you go from a high point down to a low point. That high point gives you enough impetus to go to another high point. So we thought all we had to do was fit out the existent high points. So we tried to make a skate park that didn't isolate skateboarders. I mean, we hate parks in which there's a particular skateboard park in the middle because pedestrians are frightened of skateboarders. So we tried to make a place where this is the space of the pedestrian ramp. Next to the pedestrian ramp, then are these skating ramps, what skateboarders call a snake run of ramps, so that pedestrians are always next to skateboarders or under skateboarders. This is maybe a little bit exaggerated in height. On one side, the skating ramps go towards the cone-shaped hill. Instead of going on top of the hill, they go inside the hill. And this would have been easy to do because the cone-shaped hill is a person-made hill. So we thought, let's use the interior. So the bowls of our skate park would be in the inside of the hill. There would be cuts in the hill to let sunlight in. We tried to specify, and they said this was going to happen, but then again, it never got built, so anything could happen. But we wanted the skateboard to always be open, so that when the sunlight wasn't there, it would be constantly lit, so it could be used at all hours. On the other side of the cone-shaped hill, the skating ramps step up the slope, and when they get to the top of the plateau, they become these quarter pipes and half pipes that skateboarders can jump, not exactly jump into the water, but maybe in the back of our minds was skateboarding probably started from surfing anyway, so maybe surfers and skateboarders could join. Some other examples of the notion of stretching, some signs of, maybe you can think of a building as stretching. This is a proposal we made in 2004 for a library in Guadalajara in Mexico. The library was going to be next to a highway. The competition brief said that there had to be an expansion principle. The library would always need more room in the future, more books in the future. So we kept the highway in mind. We made our building first by stepping down into the ground to make a kind of plaza. Once we stepped down, then we could step up. So the library itself steps up. The highway is nearby, so the library can go over the highway. We started with a very simple idea. Books are dangerous, so maybe they should take you away from home, so the library should go over the highway into the rest of the city. The way we envisioned it, they could be constant like tentacles into different places. Did we really think this was going to be built? Probably not. Did we want it to be built? We want the idea to be built sometime or other. Operation number 10, braid, knot, weave. A few years ago, 2005, I think, New York City had a competition for a new light system. Probably needless to say, the proposal that won is almost exactly like the old light system. The competition brief suggested that the new light post was going to have to hold a lot of different kinds of lights, a lot of different kinds of signs. So it suggested that the post be very thick. And we thought maybe that's a misguided suggestion, because all those different kinds of lights, all those different kinds of signs wouldn't always be needed. So very often we start a project by maybe questioning the competition suggestions. Maybe that gives us a starting point. So we thought, why don't we make the thinnest possible post? Each thin post would hold one kind of light or one kind of sign. So when you need more than one, you would braid these posts together, braid them together, knot them together, so they could then have as many different kinds of lights, different kinds of signs. This is one of those projects that I hope we have a chance to do something like this somewhere. It won't be the same. This is what we were thinking in 2005. I hope we're thinking differently now. Another example of braiding was a project we started a few years ago, and then we thought was dropped, but now it's kind of come back, so you never can tell. It's a project we were asked to do by these two brothers in Athens. They wanted us to do a house for them. So since it was going to be a house for both brothers, well, it was when I went to see the site, it was the first time I had been in Greece, and I was very struck by the extensive balcony life in Greece. People spend a lot of time outside, but it's an outside connected to their house. So our first proposal, and I'm not sure now that we go back to it if we'll stick to this, but our first proposal was these two intersecting spirals. So one spiral makes one brother's house, the other spiral, the other brother's house. And the intersecting spirals means that the roof of one brother's house becomes the balcony of the other brother's house, and vice versa. So it might be still a starting point. Operation. I'd like to get through most of these things, or just to give you an idea of the way, it's not the only way to think, but it's one way to think maybe when you think in terms of public space, a people to public space, what can people do in a space. Operation number 11, twist, warp, morph. This is a project we did in 2003. It's on the River Mur in Graz in Austria. We were asked to do on the River Mur a person-made island, and it was to have three functions: a theater, a cafe, and the playground. So we started with what we thought was a conventional idea for a theater, a bowl. what if we twisted this bowl? What if we turned the bowl upside down? The bowl was the theater, the upside down bowl becomes a dome, that becomes the cafe. The twisting, warping space from bowl to dome and vice versa becomes the playground. The theater, it's lit at night. Light comes up from under the bleachers of the theater. Light shines down from the roof of the cafe. Here we're in the cafe. The bowl is starting to twist into a dome. We knew the theater wasn't always going to be used as a theater. We thought if the seats were straight, people are always looking straight ahead, as if at an airport, as if at a theater. If we wave the seats, maybe they'll be used for person-to-person seating. This is the space where the cafe, the playground is part of the ceiling. Here people are entering the dome, the cafe. As you enter, there's a canopy over the doorway. It twists down to make lounge seating around the dome, around the cafe. There's also movable seating, tables for two, you can put them together, tables for four, tables for six. Our bar starts with a kind of rubber band above. The rubber band comes down and makes three bar counters, one on top of each other. We had a reason in mind. We try to think when we're doing a project, how will a space be used? If there's a bar, we assume that some people are going to be drunk. If they're drunk, maybe they can't see. So if they have a glass in their hand, if they have three bar counters, one on top of each other, maybe they have a chance of putting the glass down. Operation number 12. Adapt, change, modify, a chameleon architecture. I wanted to keep this section mostly recent pieces, but every once in a while I just want to go back to some earlier examples. This was a 1993 project that was based on the notion of change. Acconci Studio did it in collaboration with Stephen Hall Architects. It's for a gallery space in New York, storefront for art and architecture. Here maybe we had, sometimes a very low budget can be a kind of advantage. We wanted to do a renovation of the space. We had an approximately $40,000 budget, but the storefront space is very, very narrow. At its widest point, it's 15 feet wide. Then it goes down to 5 feet. So we thought maybe we could renovate the space just by making a kind of new storefront. So we made a storefront. We made a storefront that was divided into parts. These parts then can hinge both vertically and horizontally. So if a part of the facade hinges horizontally, it can function as a table. It can function as maybe a sculpture stand, a stand for a model. There's also at sometimes a kind of continuous space from inside to outside. I have to admit, I know Stephen really loves this project. I have a nagging doubt that it's maybe a useful project in the spring and summer. It's a terrible space in the fall and winter. You know, one of the reasons architecture exists is because nature is dangerous. So that maybe we have to kind of take care of that. Okay, other examples of change. Back to the coffee tea set. The way it works is from the transparent connectors you take out cups and saucers. This spheroid has 4 flat points. So you roll it to a flat point. Now you can insert a cup inside. You press up. Now you have coffee. You rotate it then to another point, to another flat point, another flat spot. You can get milk, sugar, etc. Another example of change. Back to the Seoul project, this floodable island. When the island, I mentioned that there are these hotel capsules on the island. When the island, in the crevices of the island, when the island floods, the hotel capsules now are floating in the water. Since it was only a first proposal, we didn't have to worry about things like, what if the flood lasts for 3 weeks? Though in the back of our mind, we did have a solution. We thought one of these capsules could be a rescue boat, so could take people off the islands. Another example of change, a project we did, again, I think more of a public art project we were designing maybe in 97, was built in 2000. It's for the courtyard of the Munich Buildings Department Administration building. The building itself has a tower, and there's, as I said, a courtyard in the middle. So the way we started was, could we do something with the highs and lows of this site? So since there was a tower, we installed a wind turbine on the top of the tower. So it's moved by the wind. It produces electricity. Down in the courtyard, one ring is cut out of the ground, and it's placed on a turntable below ground. This turntable is activated by the electricity produced by the wind turbine on the tower, so that this ring of the courtyard is very, very slowly and very constantly moving. So that you might be standing on one side of the ring, somebody else is in the ring, you blow your nose and the person's gone. Or you look at a tree and then the tree is 10 feet away. Strangely, they realized that it's now providing electricity for half of the building. That this was something that we had no idea would happen, but maybe we should start to deal with those things. Another example of change, there are some competitions that are called idea competitions. They're not going to, they're not thinking of building something, at least not now, but they're trying to gather ideas. Maybe something might be built in the future. This was a proposal we were asked to make for an ideas competition for Strasbourg in France. It was an ideas competition for a plaza in Strasbourg. We wanted to do a kind of plaza of plazas. Could we have a constantly changeable plaza? Does something have to remain the same? So we had these arcs that supported canopies, roofs, but these roofs could constantly shift. They could constantly go wherever there needed to be, if there needed to be shelter, if there needed to be shade. The arcs themselves were light carriers. Embedded in the ground was a track system, so all the furniture of the park could be moved. You're sitting on a chair here, you want to sit next to a person over there, you move your chair over. By that time, the person has inevitably moved away from you, but it's constantly like musical chairs, moving chairs. Chairs and tables could be moved. The tables could be moved together to make a marketplace. Tables could be moved together to make a platform for a stage. Seats moved together to make theater seating. One of the things we had to be aware of was that The ground of this plaza couldn't bear very much. It couldn't bear much weight. But there's a parking garage underground. The parking garage has columns. So we, above ground, built these columns above ground, and it would be something that could support now a little pavilion-like building. It would close like a fan. It could open like a fan. It didn't have to be grounded on the ground. Operation number 13, portable architecture, mobile architecture. Back to the umbrella. It has some advantages over the conventional umbrella. You can tie either end, one end to your waist, one end to your wrist, so you could carry things. You could wrap it around you like a kind of shawl, so there's maybe not an umbrella bumping problem. A second person can easily come in under the umbrella. Then because of the folding system, it should be able to fold down to something, the size of your fist. We have to make a prototype of this. I don't know if it'll happen. An example. One thing we love about clothing is that it's kind of like the architecture you take with you. I'm kind of convinced that the architecture of the future will be a constantly mobile architecture. I'm going back to the 90s again for a project we did in the 90s. In 1991, we did a project called Mobile Linear City, a conventional tractor and trailer. The trailer contains other units inside it. So when you get it to a place where you can park, you now pull these 4 other units out of this one unit, so it becomes five times its size, and it works pretty easily. You pull down the back legs of one unit. Now you drive the truck forward a little bit, put out the next set of legs, drive the truck forward a little bit. The walls hinge in, making furniture, tables and chairs, etc. The smallest unit is a service unit, so you have a stove, a toilet, etc. It has a particular quirk. This toilet that's folded down, when it's hinged up, the place is more private. The toilet is facing outside. If you need to use the toilet, you bring it down, but now your ass is exposed to the outside world. We've been trying to work on a car that I think we have to give up. We wanted to try to make a car that doesn't need tires. It's based on a science, or maybe a pseudoscience, called cymatics, in which the insertion of sound into a plane makes the plane ripple. The rippling of planes then could possibly cause motion. We were working with a physicist at MIT who said that he's proven it can go 15 miles an hour, but I think that means this is a fantasy. We love science fiction. We can't stand fantasy, because science fiction is an anticipation of the future. Fantasy is Never Never Land. This is Never Never Land. But it had some things we would love to pursue. We wanted the car to be a soft car, almost as if taking the idea of airbags and making the whole car of airbags, based on the principle that maybe the best way to meet impact is not by resisting it, but by bending and yielding. Also, the cars, we thought of maybe cars in the future could plug together. Not everybody wants to drive, so one person drives, everybody else goes to sleep. Okay, operation number 14, like a parasite, like a virus. I think designers of my generation, and I think generations after, were very struck by the Ridley Scott movie Blade Runner, based on the Philip Dick story. For me, for example, it was a notion of science fiction that was the opposite of Stanley Kubrick's 2001. Not that I disliked that version, but that version was an all abstract future. Everything's all white. Everything is built as if from the ground up. The Blade Runner notion was that you could never have enough money to tear everything down. So why don't we build on what's already there? There were cities that already do this. You know, Rome did it. So the notion of architecture as a parasite on another architecture is something that's always on our mind. These were two pieces from the 90s done for a museum show. We were asked to do some new projects. So outside the museum, we did something we called a park up a building. There are these expandable rods that then can hook onto the top of a building, and they carry this kind of park. It has a companion piece, a house up a building that has portable shower, bath, etc., and it kind of takes electricity from the inside of the museum, which is probably what a parasite really should do. We tried to do a version of a parasite in Brazil in 2001. Brazil has been cut through by all these highways, elevated highways. Not all of Brazil, Sao Paulo, sorry. Projects are done for particular cities, not for whole countries or whole worlds. I'm trying to go fast. And when I go fast, I realize I'm leaving out words. Anyway, once there was this underside of the highway, we thought, can we do some kind of housing that clings onto the underside of the highway and can be used so it's lifted up off the street and can be used by people who maybe are forced to live on the street. The housing itself is on the underside of the highway, so it doesn't need a roof, but we thought if we extended it up next to the highway, now it becomes a kind of garden. So house under, garden next to it, so that it's used by people, it's lit inside, and as a byproduct, it lights the neighborhood under the highway, which is potentially a kind of dangerous neighborhood. Now it would have a kind of lighting system. Here on one side, on the right side, people are sitting on a kind of bleacher system, watching a large television screen. On the other side is a kind of washing area, washing clothes, washing people. It's one of those projects that was supposed to have been built but never was. This was never supposed to be built. A kind of parasite project we proposed a few years ago for a subway station in New York. Actually, maybe I'd like to allow time for conversation, so maybe we should skip some of these. It was an atrium space, and we thought atriums are really attractive, but there's all this wasted space there. There's so much space and it can't be used for people. So we tried to turn the atrium in on itself. So there's still a narrow atrium in the middle, but now there's a space around it that can be used as this vertical park. There could be this spiraling park that people could use. Now, how often people would want to use a park while waiting for a subway, I'm not sure. So maybe we didn't count for something. We want the kinds of spaces that change. We want the kinds of spaces that maybe people cause. So another operation is emergence, growth, architecture from the bottom up, architecture from inside out. This is a project we're working on now in Indianapolis. It should be built next year. To tell the truth, it started because it was a relatively low budget project, and we thought, we can't really do much physically. So we started to think, we think we want to combine physical spaces and virtual spaces, but we haven't really touched very much a virtual space. So this was maybe an attempt to. There's a street in Indianapolis that goes through a building. It's a parking lot for the basketball arena. So it's a very, very populated space. It would be a different volume of color in the morning, in the afternoon, and at night. And when people cycle through it or walk through it, there's a kind of mesh area around them that holds above them and to their side, that holds thousands of LED lights. So the people activate sensors that make this kind of swarm of LED lights, almost like fireflies around you. So if you have these fireflies around you, somebody else coming in the other direction has it. Now you exchange fireflies, so that the space is constantly changing, constantly shifting. So this notion of attractors and repellers, these lights are attracted now to other lights, makes us think, can we do other things that way? We've been trying to think, can you make clothing based on the principle of attractors and repellents? We've started to try, but we really don't know. Last two or three operations. Operation number 16, an architecture that feeds itself. Sometimes we worry. Well, we always worry. We always worry about the stuff we do. We think, why are we making these spaces that are so curved, that are so folded in on itself? Everybody's doing spaces like that. Is there a reason for a space like that? There might be. If you have a space that curves in on itself, it starts to form a lot of wind inside. So it could be something maybe other than a wind turbine, which simply collects wind. You can possibly make a space that makes wind, that because of the different direction of the currents, you can make more wind than you had before. A way to do it would be you make the surface filled with millions of little hairs. So anytime one hair is affected, another hair is affected. So more and more wind is possibly produced. Operation number 17, an architecture of air. This is a project that might be done next year for an art fair in Miami Beach. It would be made all of inflatables. The roof would be inflatables lifted by helium balloons. The furniture would be all of inflatable. This was a project we did for the Guggenheim Museum just recently. The Guggenheim asked about 250 architects and artists to, in effect, do a new Guggenheim, but only in design. So they did a show called Contemplating the Void. Can we rethink Frank Lloyd Wright's space? So we did a space that was filled with these kinds of like stretchable, rubbery lines. It was based on the premise that the Guggenheim, the void in the Guggenheim is so inviting that it's hard to resist the idea of throwing yourself off the edge. You start to think maybe you could fly. So this would be a space where you could throw yourself off the edge, and you would be constantly caught up by these lines. These little bubbles in the middle are all the past and possibly future Guggenheim shows. So you can have them virtually. You can stick your head in and see the past, etc. Last operation. Operation 18, Mix, Swarm, Multitudes. Back for a minute to the Soul Project. Now that the space is pushed in, there's all this extra space that's not used. Since we didn't do a green landscape outside, we could use these in-between spaces as a kind of jungle space inside. So you could be in a concert hall, you walk out of the concert hall, you walk through a jungle, you go to a restaurant, etc. Back to the World Trade Center project. Now that the building is riddled with holes, the holes make tunnels through the building, tunnels from one side to the other side, tunnels from bottom to top, and vice versa. Now that there are tunnels, the rest of the city can come inside. Parks can come inside the building. Street vendors can come inside the building. In other words, instead of observing the convention of a building can be built a few stories higher if they have a so-called public space in front, but the public space in front is public only if you obey the rules of the corporation. We're trying to propose, can there be a mix of public and private space? For example, that grayish column at the left of the image is an elevator shaft going from office to office. These white columns are waterfalls going from park to park. The notion of mix is, I think, the most important notion to us. Maybe it's not so great if a space is just totally public. Maybe if there's a so-called public space, what can people do there except maybe have lunch or maybe be gathered together and become a kind of totalitarian space. A leader stands up and gathers. Sometimes I think public spaces in a city are places where the city can get a large number of people together so they can easily run surveillance cameras on them, so they know where their children are. So maybe a new public space is different. A new public space is alleys, is back rooms, is the internet, etc. Okay, why don't we turn the lights on and see if we can talk. Thank you.
I'll just quickly say that we have two mics, one mic. Okay, one mic, and we have. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll bring the mic to you. And please questions and not statements. Thanks a lot.
Well, it should be a conversation, though. Okay. I mean, no, I don't mean, I mean, let's have a discussion, I don't know, or something like that. Should I be up here, or yeah? I guess.
That's up to you. That's up to you.
Well, if I don't have a microphone down there, right? Should I stay here?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't like this position, but anyway.
So you've been very clear about your departure, your withdrawal from the art context, gallery, museum. So what's interesting is that perhaps when you decide, like this evening, to reinsert yourself or re-engage with the white box, the gallery, the art context, it's one of discussion. It's for the purposes of discussion or maybe even critique. Critical discussion.
Yeah.
So my question is, does an artist need to withdraw from the role of art making in order to engage in a critical discussion or
No.
that kind of meeting?
I don't think so. I wonder, though, if the critical discussion an artist becomes engaged in is wrapped up maybe too much in the kind of art world politics. I'm not so sure if the problem with an artist in the middle of an art space is that it's an already won over audience. The audience is probably a comparatively liberal audience, that I wonder what's being discussed and wouldn't it be better to discuss with people who aren't on your side? And I don't know if in the art world you can. I'm not sure, obviously, But I mean, there is a very different kind of public art than the kind I've presented, I've presented a kind of public art where, that's a relatively physical thing, where people are making spaces. There are other kinds of public art that have nothing to do with a physical space. That is, I think this is the kind you're talking about. That it's about the transference of ideas rather than people being part of a place and maybe gathering ideas. Why do I have a resistance to that kind of space? Because I think people have a resistance. When an idea is presented to me, I start to think, shouldn't I have figured it out by myself? That I like ideas presented in such in amazingly concrete terms that you don't even recognize them as ideas. Then I feel like I'm liberated to have multi-ideas. I'm liberated to have ideas that can contradict themselves. What I'm afraid of ideas in a discussion group is that does it become strangely like politics, that in order for it to succeed has to be oversimplified. Current administration is probably a great example. Ideas that why was Jimmy Carter such an unpopular president? Because he admitted he changed his mind. You kind of can't do that in politics, and I wonder if you can do that. I mean, a discussion group isn't a political system. I'm just not sure what happens with that kind of discussion. I can't say that it shouldn't be done. I wouldn't know how to use it. I wouldn't know how to do it. I find that I like embodied ideas. I like ideas when they're embodied in a place you're in or a place you're on top of. When people then, if people are interpreting those ideas, there are many different versions. Whereas when an idea is expressed as an idea, I wonder how far you can go. I don't know. I mean, I want the outcome of things to be ideas, but I want a space to be of one concretion after another so that you get constantly confused. I think the best ideas come from a confusion. Yeah.
In your earlier work, especially your writing, you seemed to be opening up the space of the page by erasing words or creating a negative space. And now in your design work, you seem to constantly be seeing a space that needs something to be filled with, whether it be light, whether it be plants, whether it be a river.
Yeah.
Do you no longer believe in this concept of negative space? And if there was an architecture created negative space, what would that user look like?
I don't know if I ever believed in the concept of negative space. I believed in traveling over a page. I didn't think that was negative. I didn't think the space was negative. The space was there. I wanted a view. I wanted an interaction with the reader and a page, so the reader would go from one margin to another. I don't think I ever thought of it as a negative space. I didn't want it to have words that referred to another space. Therefore, I didn't want to talk about a tree. I wanted it to be a space that, revealed the page, but not so much as negative, I don't think. I don't know if anything could be that devoid of incident. There's always something. There's always particles. There's I would rather try to, I would love now, with this this operation that I just kind of added last night, this architecture of air thing, I realized that the kinds of spaces we're trying to do are spaces that break out into little particles. They're not so solid. I don't know exactly how to do those. No, I don't know if I can envision what a negative space would be, except in the realm of ideas. Yes, an idea space can be that. I don't think a space that you're in the middle of can ever be. Why is a negative space so inviting?
I think because it would have room to create an idea. I mean, if you're talking about users, or if you're talking about a participant's use of the space,
Yeah.
then I think that it would cause a place for reflection. It would cause
Yeah,
a place
maybe.
to actually
I'm curious you use the word create. I don't think you can create. Not that I believe only God can create, since I don't believe God, but I think you put different things together, but there have to be things there to put together. I think once there's nothing, I don't know if there's any reason to do anything. I think anything I've done comes from something else. Do I know all the time? Maybe I try to transform it. There's maybe now an outdated book, but there's a book by a literary critic a long time ago the critic was named Harold Bloom, and he wrote a book called The Anxiety of Influence, and his thesis was that every poet has in mind this poetry that he really loves, and he or she knows that there's no way that he or she can do better than that. But maybe what you can do is you take the poem and you try to copy it, but you don't want anybody to know that you copied. So in the act of trying to camouflage that you copy, you start to invent something else, but it's based on something that, I think that's a kind of convincing thing, I don't know, I mentioned things like when I first in the 80s started to think, or maybe late 70s, started to think, I wonder if my stuff is going toward architecture. I looked at a lot of archigram stuff, because that's a kind of science fiction architecture. But I looked also at Venturi. I didn't love Venturi's architecture, but I love Venturi's books, learning from Las Vegas, for example. And he's right, you're always learning from something. And I don't know, I just can't imagine what a non-incident, non-concretion space would be, even in the realm of ideas. I don't know what I know you don't mean a blank space, but I wonder, I have to end. I wonder ... I don't know how to finish. A literary critic a long time ago the critic was named Harold Bloom, and he wrote a book called The Anxiety of Influence, and his thesis was that every poet has in mind this poetry that he really loves, and he or she knows that there's no way that he or she can do better than that. But maybe what you can do is you take the poem and you try to copy it, but you don't want anybody to know that you copied. So in the act of trying to camouflage that you copy, you start to invent something else, but it's based on something that, and I think that's a kind of convincing thing, I don't know, when I mentioned things like when I first in the 80s started to think, or maybe late 70s, started to think, I wonder if my stuff is going toward architecture. I looked at a lot of archigram stuff, because that's a kind of science fiction architecture. But I looked also at Venturi. I didn't love Venturi's architecture, but I love Venturi's books, learning from Las Vegas, for example. And he's right. You're always learning from something. And I don't know. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine what a non-incident, non-concretion space would be, even in the realm of ideas. I don't know what a. I know you don't mean a blank space, but I wonder. I have to end. I wonder. ... I don't know. I don't know how to finish.
So, in your early work, the installations especially, one of the things that you did was you brought not just language, but spoken language into them. And it was a really kind of interesting, the work was one of the things that made it really striking was it was a lot of installations were using similar forms, but there was this soundtrack that had language that had your voice. Can you conceive of an architecture that would somehow incorporate spoken language? Or
I think about it a lot. I don't know, much as I too liked those installations, the way I was thinking of sound then, and the brief example I gave from where we are now, who are we anyway, maybe gives that idea. I got really interested in sound when I wasn't using my own person anymore. I think the first reason I got interested in sound was that I felt like there was absolutely no reason to use one's own person in a project. The time had changed. It didn't really mean anything. But I was afraid to leave my person. So I probably started using my voice just as a kind of leftover, as a residue of my person. But then I started to get interested in things that a lot of people have noted about sound that really started to fascinate me. The fact that you can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears. So that sound is very pervasive. You can't so easily get rid of sound. The fact that in most Western culture languages, a mystic sees things, but an insane person hears things. So that Western culture has associated with sound some notion of be careful. The Catholic Church, for example, has for years been able to avoid making Joan of Arc a saint because Joan of Arc didn't have visions. She heard voices. So she's not a saint, she's a witch. So I think, when I was using sound then, I was starting to think, one thing about sound is it's really oppressive, And I think the way I was using sound, maybe it didn't work, but the way I was using sound in those installations, the way I thought I was using sound, was there was this voice that was constantly saying, what do you think, so-and-so? What do you think, so-and-so? As if they were driving a person up against a wall. So at some point, I hoped the viewer would say, wait a minute, why am I being pressured like this? Why am I being oppressed like this? I don't know if that ever happened.
Well, one of the things that I remember happening was that, and maybe it's similar to what you just said, but the spaces felt very haunted, which I think is in some way related to architecture because, you can only haunt the space, right?
Yeah, but I don't know.
Well, I don't know if you want to, but...
Yeah, if a house is, if the space is haunted, I want people to make their own haunts. I don't know. I don't want people to feel like they have to become sleepwalkers in this space. And I have a feeling, I don't know, I've been told that, that the way I use my voice, I can convince people to listen to the telephone book. I know I can use my voice. I have the kind of voice that lulls you through a dark disturbed night, you know. But I don't know if that's so great, you know, because it can hypnotize you.
I understand, but I wasn't asking so much about your voice.
Yeah, no, I know.
Just
Yeah.
audio and spoken language and sound.
I would love us to try, you know. I don't know what it would be, you know. What I'm afraid of is does it make if it can be something that can change. If it's something that always comes back the same way, then I wonder, you know. But I do feel like, you know, I think our maybe, you know, kind of timid attempt to maybe use lights, maybe it's a precursor to trying to use some other stuff. That's a weak answer, but I don't know. I don't know how to give a more solid one.
Raise your hand, please, and then you get the mic.
Earlier you talked about art world politics, and that once you enter the white cube or the white space, you're already sort of preaching to the converted about images. Do you feel the same way about the world of architecture? I mean, you mentioned some of your curvilinear works a lot like other architecture.
Yeah.
Just the politics of design briefs in general, and how it's different the same in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I heard recently a strange thing, or what I hope is a strange thing, was that there are more Republican architects than, next to doctors, there are more Republican architects in any field. So it might be a different kind of politics, and possibly because architects, you know, depend on a power structure in order to build something. So it might be even a worse politics than the art world. I don't know. I don't know sometimes to separate what's politics and what's the kind of I don't know, maybe easy habits of a time. You know, the introduction of computer thinking has obviously changed people's ideas of design. You know, it's much easier to do curved spaces. I still have the hope that maybe there are some reasons for these spaces, that it's not just because, you know, sometimes I think, are we doing the equivalent of making wrought iron patterns, you know, because people talk about patterns a lot now. I don't know, it's hard for me to know what you know, there are so many things in the air in architecture. There are so many kinds of words in the air, words like flow, fluid space. But I think there's a reason for fluid space. A fluid space does mean that maybe, you know, it's a possibly changeable space. That a fluid space does allow you not to have the same kind of sameness. So some of those things that are in the air, I don't know if it's any different than the kind of finding oneself of the 60s was in the air. I know that I'm kind of talking around your question because I'm not sure how to answer it directly. I don't know if it's a politics. But it certainly is a kind of tenor of the time. But that time is, you know, interpretable differently by people. But I mean, I've always had a tendency that the thing that I've been, I can't say most influenced by, but the thing that I feel connects me most to the time I'm in is the music of the time. So, you know, in the late 60s, I was really involved with this single person long song. But at the same time, I thought there's something funny about this. It's all rural music. It sounds like country songs. It's not about a city. But at the same time then, there was some other kind of music. The Velvet Underground started to appear. When I first heard the Velvet Underground, I thought, this is the city. It doesn't have all the time in the world. It's being oppressed. It's being pressured. It's being pressured by things, and that then led to things like, well, there was a band called the New York Dolls at that time, that when I first heard, I totally misunderstood. I thought it was make-believe and failed Rolling Stones. Then after a while, after they no longer existed, I realized they were kind of incredible, because they were kind of, there was a kind of casualness, that there was a kind of, on the one hand, a kind of casualness, on the other hand, this kind of insistence. It was kind of like the beginning of punk, which had the principle, no, maybe I can't play an instrument, but I'm going to play it as long as I can and as hard as I can. So it had this kind of, introduction of the human being, the individual. In the mid-'70s, the music that affected me most was punk, the Ramones, the Sex Pistols. Very different sense of time, no longer long songs, because it was all about screaming, and a scream can't last for 7 minutes, 8 minutes. So it was short song. It was still a solo voice. It didn't sound like a solo voice. It sounded like, I don't know, maybe it was badly recorded. It sounded like a number of people together. In the 80s, there wasn't much music. There wasn't much music of the time that I was that interested in. There was holdovers. There was a lot of post-punk stuff, mostly British. I was really very interested in the Fall, in the Mekons. By the mid-'90s, I started to get really interested in music again with the introduction of Tricky, some early Moby stuff. Suddenly it was music as a kind of mix of cultures, mix of tempos, very different from the single-minded punk stuff. But now it was much more meandering, winding around, using different kinds of instruments. It might be a tricky record, but most of the voices weren't tricky. It was a real opening up time for me, and I started to be totally involved with music again. More recently is probably the first time the music I've been most involved with isn't vocal music. The music I'm most involved with is a kind of pop electronic music that probably has very small audiences, mostly European. Vladislav Delay, Alvin Noto, some Japanese noise music, though I admit I find it hard to work with, whereas Vladislav Delay is easy. I'm convinced that architecture and music are the same thing. Both architecture and music make a surrounding, make an ambience. Maybe music does it more successfully in that it doesn't need a physical thing, which goes back to, maybe there can be an architecture of sound. I know you weren't saying it's only sound, but there can be, there are speaker systems now that isolate you in the sound. They can be just as much of a wall as a physical thing. I'm not sure how I started talking about influences. It started with your question about, is there a kind of architecture politics? I mean, I'm sure every field has a politics. Why don't I feel as bothered by it as I think I felt by art world politics? Because you know who's part of the art world. You can see them all the time. You don't know who's using architecture. Everybody's using architecture. And I guess that's what I love about architecture, that it's not used by, it might be made by an architecture world, but it's used and then maybe changed by every other possible world. For me, the reason stuff of mine became design and architecture is that I started to think, wow, with design, you can deal with all the possible everyday occasions of everyday life. And I don't know if you can do that in art. That doesn't mean everyday occasions are necessarily better. To me, and maybe this makes me answer your question, your question about the white box of design groups. I don't know. I feel that, and I think this has happened to me. Though, yeah, I've gotten so much stuff from books, from movies, but I think the stuff that affects me most is when I don't know I'm getting it. When I'm walking through a city, for example, when nothing is being presented to me to learn, I think that's what I'm learning. That's what I'm really learning. That's what I'm learning. Why? That's what I'm learning about intersections. I was very struck in the late '60s that after the late '60s, when new universities were built, there was this great fear of Columbia and Berkeley, because these were universities that were built like cities. There were constant intersections. When there are intersections, people can meet. When there are intersections, people can talk, they can discuss, they can argue. That's when the revolution can begin. So when buildings in 1973, there was a single pathway from a place where students lived to a dining hall. It was like, try to prevent meeting. And the notion of, it's, and it's certainly not that most of what I've gotten in my life, most of what I learned came from, a lot of movies of the late '60s and early '70s, but not just that. Yes, Godard movies meant a lot to me. René and Robbe-Grier's Last Year of Marienbad was probably the most important movie I ever saw. However, the beginning of Jack Rafelson's King of Marvin Gardens, where Jack Nicholson as a kind of all-night talk show. It begins in black, then Jack Nicholson's face comes into the screen. He's facing the audience saying, "I never told you why I never eat fish." Things like that changed my life.
Yeah.
We have time for really one more question, please, and then we're going to have to wrap after that. So whoever.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak about your transition from your art practice to your architecture practice, in the way that I see your earliest works being these either creations of architectural spaces or modifications of it in the sort of simplest ways that, if you had an idea, you could make it happen very simply.
Yeah.
And then working towards what you said now, you said at the most you get maybe 12% of your ideas.
Yeah.
So with 88% of your ideas not getting made, not because, in an art practice, let's say 90% of your ideas don't get made because you decide they're not good ideas. Maybe 10% of your ideas are good enough to show the public.
Yeah, but usually
your work is going up now against like colossal budgets, city governments, and all those things, and contests and so on.
Sure.
How do you deal with that? You mentioned.
I deal with it because if I wanna get stuff in a normal everyday world, the everyday, you don't need railings in a gallery, but you need railings in an everyday world where people are going to sue. In order to get stuff in an early day world, I gladly accept that. Not gladly accept it. It pains me, but at the same time, it makes me think, I don't want to have a railing, but I know I need a railing. Can I be so inventive? Can I be more inventive than I ever thought I could be? Maybe I could make a railing that doesn't look like a prison. Maybe I can force myself. I think I have to force myself to think of things more in the real world than in an art world, because you kind of didn't have to. You could almost do anything. But also another thing is that the time has changed. The 21st century is, I don't know if the same kind of if the same kind of simply separated things can exist. I think the 21st century and a computer and the notion of computer thinking makes so many things happen at the same time that I think there is a reason for an enormously complex space because it's not so single-minded. It hopefully can lead to a mix of ideas. And I mean, I crave, do I know how to use computers myself? No. However, I'm in the middle of it all the time. I mean, and the people in the studio, and I've made a point. I want us to think like computers. I don't want us to use the computer as a tool. I want to use the computer as a companion. I feel like if we nudge the computer, if we pet it, then we'll learn how to work with it. I see a future where people are going to be partly robotic, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with combining with the electronic or the machine. It can improve people. I think the future will be a future where all architecture will be mobile, because there won't be any countries, there won't be any national boundaries. Why do I know that? Because why are people so against immigrants? People are so against things when they know that the world is going to change and they want to hold back this change. Maybe that's why people are going to gyms so much. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with going to a gym, but they know that their body isn't going to be there all the time. It's going to be combined with other things. So when I think, and I think that's all the better. Mix is better. If I'm mixed with a robot, I can do many more things than I can do. So I don't know. Yes, I admit the thing I welcome most is change. Do I believe that all change is good? No, of course not. But I do believe all change has to be tried. It's a risk. Maybe you change into something that you can't take back, so you made a horrible mistake. But maybe it's worth the mistake for the possibility that at least change is something that I can't necessarily foresee. I've probably been accused sometimes of that. I don't take things from the past enough. I'm not so sure. It's not that I dismiss the past, but I recognize that I can't see and think about the past the way people in the past did. I can only see and think about the past with 21st century eyes in mind. So it's never going to be the same past. And why regret it? It's impossible. So again, maybe the more time goes by, maybe the more times you can see in conjunction with the present time. And I want to do. I've never done. I mean, one maybe flaw I've always had is that I've always been much more attracted to the stage of thinking where you get some first idea for a project. I've never been that particularly interested in doing something again and again, perfecting something. And that's probably a lack, yet I know the reason. I've done work because I want to be excited each day. I want to be excited by some potentially new idea. And if I know what I'm doing when I get up, I don't think I can be that excited. If I get up and I think we were stuck last night on this project, but maybe we won't be stuck this morning. Inevitably, maybe there were 3 or 4 more days of being stuck. But there's always that possibility. I don't know how to get excited by stuff if I'm not trying something that I didn't know before. Somebody else might know it. I'm not saying that everything I try is a new thing, but I probably know having new ideas all the time is not going to make me younger, but maybe it at least won't make me older. I want to get older, since there's the other choice between getting old is totally unacceptable. So I have to keep getting old. But I do work because I get excited by it, I hope, you know. I've done stuff, you know, yes, I've survived. I've never made a great amount of money with work, especially because the kind of stuff we do, you know, demands money. You know, it costs a lot to have a studio of five people. Yet, I hate to say I depend on anything, but now I don't know if I know how to work alone anymore. And I like the idea of work coming out of a discussion. At the same time, when people go away at the end of the day, I feel kind of relieved, because now I can pace a while, you know. Now I can pace and be alone, but I know I'm going to go back to people questioning every idea I put out the next day. And I think you know, do I need that? Can I not question them myself enough? I don't know. I mean, the nice thing about working in a group is that somebody is always saying, we have to go somewhere else. That's not enough. You know, with certain groups, the groups haven't always been that way. We have had people in the studio sometime who have been very, very reasonable, who have said, we have this much money to work on this project, therefore we can only work this much time. And I know the person was right, but I couldn't think anymore. I just don't know how to think like that. I know, the way I know how to think is, we know we only have this much money. We have to try to do what we want to do with this much money. You know, maybe we can't do that, and that's why a lot of stuff is unbuildable. But I only know how to work with this possible hope that maybe sometime I'll do something that's really good. Because I don't know if I have. You know. But anyway, yeah.
Well, I think we have to wrap it up, unfortunately. But thank you all for joining, and thank you, Vito, so much for your.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.